Hey, it's me, Ray, host of this very podcast. What if you had insights into your genetics that could help you live healthier? And how would you use that knowledge to change your life? You can hear me talk about how insights from my DNA have affected my personal health journey on this season of the podcast Spit from iHeartRadio and 23andMe. Host Baratunde Thurston explores how DNA isn't just about ancestry, it's a key to understanding your health. On this season, you'll hear me and 22 other podcasters discuss what genetics revealed about our health and how that knowledge has impacted the way we live our lives. Listen to my episode out now on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Football is back, and BetMGM is inviting new customers to join the huddle and enjoy the action like never before. Sign up today using bonus code JERSEY, and your first wager is risk-free up to $1,000. Visit BetMGM.com for terms and conditions. New customer offer. 21 years of age or older to wager. New Jersey only. All promotions are subject to qualification and eligibility requirements. Rewards issued as non-withdrawable free bets or site credit. Free bets expire 7 days from issuance. Please gamble responsibly. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
You're listening to 100 Words or Less with Ray Harkins. Hello, all of you fine people out in the internet era digital world that we all exist in. I'm coming at you through all the ones and zeros that are being put into your head. It's weird to think about it in that term, right? Like, this is all digital. Man, it's wild. But what is also wild is I had a discussion with a person that could not have been more coincidentally timed, but his name is Brian Cook. I spoke with him weeks before this most recent Botch news came out in regards to them reissuing their catalog on Sargent House. But I wanted Brian on because he recently released an absolutely incredible solo record that I think more people need to pay attention to. The record, or the moniker in which he plays under, is called Torment Glory, and the record is called We Left a Note with an Apology. And it is a damn good record. I honestly did not even know that it existed up until a couple of months ago. It just came out in August, so it's not like, this is something that's existed for years. But it was, it just really, I don't know what to describe it as besides just a very contemplative record. It makes you really sit down, concentrate on what Brian is accomplishing in this music. And, it's got a lot of different things going on, but I really, really enjoyed it. And he also played in Roy, plays in Russian Circles. He is a very prolific musician, and I'm so excited to have him on. And that's what we do. I mean, I know I say that about everybody, but genuinely, I'm excited to have these people on the show. That's why I bring them on this podcast to begin with. But we didn't even talk about, Botch re-releasing their stuff because that was not even part of the radar. And I wasn't going to sit there and punish him for like an hour being like, hey man, so is Botch going to reunite? Because that literally is what everybody asks him in almost every single interview. And I wasn't about to do that. I asked him about a lot of random Botch stuff, but anyways, that's neither here nor there. We get to talk to Brian Cook, and that is what's important. You can always email the show, 100wordspodcast@gmail.com. Got another, few emails from people suggesting ideas or just giving like digital high fives. I always appreciate you reaching out and saying you find value in this thing. It makes the world feel less alone because at the end of the day, I am just talking into a microphone, into a computer by myself as we speak. I mean, my dog is sleeping next to me, but this is a solitary environment. So anytime you get the reach out, it's always appreciated. And you can also leave reviews on Apple Podcasts. I know you hear about this all the time, but it does make a difference. And then tell your friends about this very show. If they like punk or hardcore or anything, any of the subgenres attached to it, they probably should be listening to this show. Not just because it's a good show, but just because it's probably relevant to their interests. But anyways, let's talk to Brian. So much fun. I really enjoyed this conversation because he got to let me bounce around to all these places where I could tell he has not been in quite some time. It was really fun. And plus, like I said, listen to the new Torment and Glory record. You can find it anywhere you find music. It is a really, really good listen. So here's Brian, and I will talk to you at the end of the episode. being a hardcore kid of a certain age, Botch loomed large in my hardcore upbringing, as it were. And it's funny because I reflect back on how I got into Botch. And I think people from the 94 to 97 range got exposed to Botch on your O Fortuna cover, which as like, I was reflecting on it. I'm like, it's weird because clearly there was no idea of like a single within the context of hardcore music, because that didn't exist. But like, that song was almost, it felt like inescapable for anybody that liked aggressive music. And I just remember it being like, wait, this is a classical song. Like, this is crazy. I don't understand this. I still, like, in existing alongside heavy music for quite some time, I have no clear idea of why you guys decided to do that. I've even had Dave on the show as well, and like did not pick his brain about it. But I was like, why? Yeah. So why did you do that, Brian?
I don't even really remember. And I think it was actually Dave. I'm not sure if you talked to Dave Erlin or Dave Knutson. I think maybe it was Dave Knutson's idea.
Okay.
But yeah, I really don't remember what the context of it was. I know when we were doing that 7-inch, we were kind of changing up our sound a little bit. We were kind of moving away from like more of a sort of traditional, like early 90s metallic hardcore sound into like a bit more of a, I don't know, kind of noisy and I hesitate to say experimental because I don't think it really qualifies as experimental, but experimental to teenagers, where it felt like we were trying to do something sort of new in that era. And the songwriting was just slow because we kind of knew we wanted to do something different and new, but we were, it was more of like a negating process, where it's like, well, we know we don't want to do this and we don't want to do this. Like, what's sort of left over? So I think we were struggling to really come up with material that we were all really happy about. And at the same time, you wanted to fit as much material onto a 7-inch as possible. So,
right.
That's where it's like, well, like, I don't think anyone's done like a hardcore version of a classic opera piece. So I guess, yeah, well, why not? Let's try it and see how that goes.
And I remember, I mean, it existed for obviously a long time after you put out that 7-inch, where people, I know you experienced this, were screaming it at shows in between your songs, and you guys are like, we have not played that song in years. We're not playing it. Like,
yeah, I think we only really played it like, maybe 2 or 3 times. And we sort of had this rule that we would only play it if someone brought a gong to the show, which is basically our way of saying like we were never going to play it. But then every once in a while, someone would roll up with a gong, and it was like, "Fuck! All right, I guess everyone fucking do a quick van rehearsal so we remember how to play O Fortuna because there's a gong tonight." So
that's pretty cool. Like, just that notion of the crowd interaction, even if it's like 20 people at a show, like clearly if they were invested enough in your band to be able to know that they needed to bring equipment like that, that says something.
Yeah, weird time. That was pre-internet too, so I'm not even sure how the word got around with that thing. We must have said something in a zine, but I remember like playing a Nashville show and kids rolled up with a gong. Damn, all right. Okay.
Yeah, you're like, well, I guess we get what we paid for.
Exactly. Yeah.
And the reason that I find it so interesting is because, to your point, like we were in the era of the infancy of the internet, but it seemed like every mix CD or mix tape like contained that, even for people that didn't necessarily like heavy music, because it was so different and that novel in like in a non like joke song way manner, but like novel from that perspective. And so I'm guessing like you probably didn't notice that until maybe much later, or you did notice kind of like right away after you put out that 7-inch that a lot of people were like, oh, hey guys, that was a really cool thing you did.
I mean, this is kind of news to me, actually.
No, if it is, then I'm glad I'm the first person to bring that up to you.
No, because I mean, I know, that's the danger of whenever you do a cover, it's something that's instantly recognizable to a lot of people, then people latch onto it. So, I was like, there's definitely a contingent of people that were really into like, we did a Rock Lobster cover for a friend's compilation.
Oh yeah, all about Friends comp. Definitely, yeah. Remember that one?
Like, oh, no one's ever going to hear this. Like this will be kind of fun. And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, every show there's someone yelling out "Rock Lobster," and it's like, damn it. The accident with O Fortuna, but yeah, I guess it's not something that people have, like. No one's making me a mixtape with one of our songs on it, so I guess I'm sort of not.
That's true. You're not the target audience.
Yeah, I'm not entirely aware of that phenomenon, but it's cool to hear.
Yeah. Well, I will definitely mention that fact that it was. I mean, at least in the within the Southern California hardcore scene, which is where I reside, it definitely felt like people knew you guys for that. And then obviously the fact that you played a lot of shows around here, in those early days and even, towards the later era of the band. But yeah, it's interesting when you had bands that had the ability to have that calling card initially to get people to pay attention. And then on top of it, be like, oh yeah, like that overall 7-inch is really good, but you got me with the cover initially or whatever. I'll pick on some more threads about that a little bit later, but reflecting on you as a person, I know were you actually born and raised in Tacoma, right?
No, I was like a military kid. So I was born in Kansas and then bounced around kind of all throughout my childhood. Didn't move to Tacoma until I was in my sophomore year of high school.
Okay. But prior to that, it was like a year or two in respective cities?
Yeah, like between the time I was born and kindergarten, we went from Kansas to Washington State to Washington, D.C. Then I started kindergarten in Hawaii, and we actually lived in Hawaii from the time I was in kindergarten until my first year of high school. Then we moved to Tacoma. And so most of my formative years were in Hawaii.
That's that's interesting for a multitude of reasons. I know the military brat lifestyle doesn't give you a lot of roots, but at the same time, it sounds like you were able to at least build some semblance of normalcy within the context of living in Hawaii. Were you on the Big Island? Were you on Oahu? Where were you?
I was on Oahu. So yeah, we were actually in Kailua, which is now kind of, a popular tourist destination, but from 1982 to 1992, when I lived there, it was just kind of like a sleepy little beach town that bordered a Marine base, and on the other side of the island there was the Army base, and my dad was Army, so we lived off base while we were there. So yeah, from the time I was like kindergarten to starting high school, even though I was a military kid, I didn't really live the average military kid's life because it was off base, and it was 10 years in the same location, so it was a bit of a major upset when, after that first year of high school, it's like, all right, now we're going to move to Tacoma where it rains every day and it's cold. And, now we're going to live on a military base. And, that was kind of a big adjustment. It was a rough,
I can imagine.
Rough first year. And then after that first year there, met Dave Knutson in I think it was in like a trigonometry class or something. And that's when Botch kind of started, and yeah. Sure.
Did, were you a surfing kid in Hawaii? Like, where did you kind of, sort of pick your spots while you were over there?
I was, I wish I'd been a surfer kid. I was like a skateboard kid, and in my adolescent mind, there was like a huge division there, even though, I think in a lot of places, like in California, I think, the cultures sort of intersected a bit more. In Kailua, it felt like you were either one or the other. You're either a surfer or you're a skater, but you didn't do both.
Yep.
Kind of one of those dumb click things that now it's like, wow, that was fucking stupid. I should have embraced both. That would have been cool. When I had a childhood spent on the beach instead of like, wearing flannel shirts because, you saw again Kurt Cobain wearing one, like sweating your ass off while you're skating in a flannel shirt in Hawaii. It's like
sure.
So yeah, I don't know. I missed out on that, but yeah, I was able to kind of get into some of the punk subculture stuff while I was in Hawaii, and that really happened through skateboarding. You know, it's like the Thrasher magazine music section, and you know, the Sessions catalog with all the punk bootleg shirts that they sold, and you know, that was my early education into underground music, was all through skateboarding.
Sure. That was the pipeline of discovery.
Yeah, and it always felt like with the surfing culture, it was way more about like reggae music, or at least in Hawaii it was, and so it was, you know, I've grown to really love a lot of reggae, but you know, again, as an adolescent, it was like, oh no, that's for potheads and surfers. Like, you know, I was all about Minor Threat and skateboarding, so it was
right.
Kind of,
you really had to draw those definitive lines.
Yeah, it was a very binary time.
Totally, yeah. It's either black or white, and then the shades of gray. Like you wouldn't even be able to pick that color out. You're just like, no, it's either this or that. That's it.
Yeah, exactly.
And so knowing that, actually, are you an only child?
No, I got 2 brothers.
Okay. And so you're the baby of the bunch?
I am the middle child.
Okay. So you were constantly looking for attention. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Is that the
I think it's like it goes, oldest child is the one that causes the most trouble because they're the first on the scene, and then the middle one's trying to find their identity, and then the youngest one is like completely ignored. Yeah. I mean, if you're typifying it.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. So did you, I guess, find yourself like caring about school? Like what sort of, I guess, life path was revealing itself to you? I mean, clearly like that doesn't make sense when you're 11 or 12, but you know, what sort of roads were you getting into besides skateboarding?
I don't know. I mean, I think, you know, now that I'm older and able to reflect on it, I think there's a lot happening subconsciously with being a kid who hits adolescent and having sort of the first realizations of like their sexual orientation, and maybe not being like the normal, what people would normally consider normal for sexual orientation. So I think that was kind of, you know, a thing at 12 where you're still like, I feel like I'm not developing the way other people are. I feel like my interests are not where other people's interests are. And, you know, I think a lot of the attraction to punk music was really just the freak flag aspect of it, and being like, oh, okay, like I already feel like I'm sort of exist on the periphery of, you know, normal life on some level, because I have this secret that I'm holding back from. And, you know, I think the fact that punk was, you know, there's so much emphasis placed on, you know, non-conformity and, you know, not caring about, you know, outdated etiquette and, you know, the status quo and all that, you know, the standard rhetoric of, you know, rebellious punk music. I think that wasn't just exciting because it's, you know, appeals to teenage rebellion. I think it was actually felt like important to me because it was like, oh yeah, this is the only kind of affirmation I'm really getting as like an outsider, you know, or someone that's, you know, a sexual deviant or whatever. Like
right.
Things you're, you know, being told by conservative teachers and things like that. So, yeah, I think that was definitely not something that I was aware of on a immediate level, but in reflection, it's like, oh yeah, I think that really kind of guided my path in a lot of ways. And I think too, just, you know, a lot of the, you know, existing in the late 80s, early 90s, and in this era where there was a lot of visibility for gay people, but it tended to be more focused on, you know, the HIV/AIDS crisis and, you know, sort of cultural stereotypes that were used as, you know, for the sake of comedy and whatnot. You know, I think that had a big impact on shaping my development as an adult, because it's like, well, you know, I don't feel like I'm a punchline, you know, like I don't feel like I'm like a stereotype or anything like that. So then that makes it even all the harder to figure out where you fit in, because it's like, well, if I'm not like someone from the Broadway play Rent, that if I don't identify with that, then, but I don't identify, with, my average peer or classmate, like where do I fit in? And
Sure.
And again, that kind of led me to into punk music.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you articulating that, because I think it is important to understand the different, variations of where people find their communities, and especially within punk and hardcore, because it is such a, a lot of people's experiences are homogenous in regards to like, I don't feel like I gel well with this, and I like aggressive music, but then, the different shades within that particular scene that can be welcoming, or on the flip side, unwelcoming, because I know that's actually something I was going to bring up in regards to, I know you've articulated the experience of, going to see Undertow at an early show and, having homophobic slurs just, because that was of that time where people would, say all of those things because they thought it was an insult and funny at the same time. And then, Pettibone and the rest of the guys, kind of stood up against that, and that was informative for you. But I think that notion that not only are you trying to find yourself within the context of the quote unquote real world, but then you're like, well, I know that I fit in better here than anywhere else, so I'm going to lean into this,
Yeah, for sure. And and like hardcore for me was super important. And, even today as a 44-year-old adult, like hardcore is still important, even if I don't track it, and it's with the same devotion I did as a 15-year-old. And I know, it's tough to be a hardcore kid at 44 now, when like so many of these bands that you looked up to haven't aged super well, and it's, like was it the Tompkins Square Park hardcore show in New York, where it was, there's all this sort of anti-mask, anti-vax attitudes circulating with it.
Anti-government. I think that's how they're labeling it. Yeah.
It's still, this is like the worst possible manifestation. If this is really just anti-establishment, this is like the worst possible manifestation.
Totally.
That you could possibly pick for like
right.
dance. But even, like the, like Chokehold, Chokehold was a super progressive political hardcore band from Toronto who were, vegan and, like super outspoken on a bunch of progressive issues. And then they come and they do a reunion, like 5 years ago or so. And, there's like I don't even remember what the scenario was, but there was some controversy about the guitar player punching a trans person and like some All Lives Matter slogan being shouted from the stage. And it's like, what? How did this happen? Like, who are these people? Like I thought Chokehold was like this super progressive anarchist band, but they haven't like checked in on the news in 20 years or something. So I feel like there is like a lot of reckoning and reflection on hardcore, and how, maybe all the sort of progressive and idealistic stances that, were sort of being talked about within that community back in the 90s was, it wasn't as progressive as everyone makes it out to be. And, I think that's a fair discussion to have, but at the same time, it's like, for me as a kid in the 90s, it seemed like one of the few sort of communal civic engagement options available to me as a teenager that was principled and that did stand for something, and that like, may have been very homogenous in terms of being kind of a, straight white kids, white boys, is at least trying and at least aware of, like misogyny being a huge factor in our society, and like having discussions about that. It was aware that homophobia was fucked up, and there was discussion about that. And, it felt like way more progressive than any other options that were presented to me as a teenager. And I think that's something important to address in conjunction with all the sort of re-examination of those bands in that era in the modern times. It's like, you can't strictly look at it through the lens of 2021. You know, it was a different time period.
Here we go. Band merch. It's incredibly important to you. It should be, right? I mean, I know you don't have to like collect hundreds and hundreds of band t-shirts, which is what I've personally done, but you can have a select few and let rockabilia.com be the place where you buy that select few pieces of merch. Because first of all, I'm going to give you 10% off by using this code. 100 words or less. That's the number 100 words or less. You can probably figure out how to spell that. But if you're having problems, you can always reach out to me. In any event, Rockabilia is all officially licensed merch. That means the bands get paid. None of this bootleg stuff that the bands don't see a dime from, because let's be honest, independent bands are not making money very many other places. And this is a great way to support them and, support an independently owned business. There's so much virtue that comes out of this purchase that I can't even begin to tell you about it, but I try every week in these beautiful ad reads. But 100 words or less. That is the promo code. That gets you 10% off, and that will get you some fancy new merch shipped right to your door, and you'll look that much cooler because of it. So thank you to Rockabilia. Again, go to rockabilia.com, use that promo code, 100 words or less, 10% off. Enjoy what you get. Hey, it's Ray, the host of this very podcast. And let me ask you a question. What if you had insights into your genetics that could help empower you to live healthier? How would you use that knowledge? You can hear me talk about insights from my DNA that have affected my personal health journey on this season of the podcast Spit from iHeartRadio and 23andMe. Host Baratunde Thurston, which, by the way, incredible dude, has a podcast called How to Citizen. I can't highly recommend that any more than I am right now, but listen to that and listen to this podcast. But he explores how more and more people are finding out that DNA is about more than just ancestry. It's a key to understanding your health. Your genetic profile can tell you if you are at an increased likelihood for developing a particular condition. It's knowledge that can help you make smarter choices about your health and your lifestyle. On this season of Spit, you'll hear me and 22 other podcasters and influencers discuss what genetics revealed about our health and how that knowledge can impact the way we live our lives. Listen to my episode out now on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts. Well, and plus to your point, just the notion of being able to bring forth and articulate ideas that you were not getting presented in any other medium. It's not like schools are talking about, veganism and animal rights or whatever. It's like it's like when you first heard about those things, you were just like, dude, not only is this, counterculture and revolutionary, but like I can actively participate in it.
Yeah.
And that is unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's like, in the 90s, hardcore wasn't one thing. And I think maybe that's the important distinction to make where, there was, Floor Punch out in New Jersey who were, like just brutal, raw dudes and, maybe not the most enlightened people, but, that was certainly one aspect of hardcore. And then, you could, on the other end, you could have something like Spit Boy or, Los Crudos, where it was like, very socially conscious and, definitely, represented a broader, broader diversity. And, I was definitely more on Team Spit Boy and Los Crudos than Team.
Right.
So,
yeah. You mean you didn't want to hang out with One Life Crew? That's kind of weird.
Yeah. Honestly, we had the One Life Crew demo because Botch played with Integrity on the when Systems Overload came out, and
sure,
Chubby Fresh from One Life Crew was playing drums for him, and he was selling a One Life Crew demo at the Integrity merch table. So we were just like, oh, well, this a guy from Integrity, we'll check it out. And it was just like a live set that they had recorded and were selling as a demo, and the between song banter was just like comedy gold. Like it was Like we listened to it constantly just because it was like, is this real? This can't possibly be real. This has to be scripted. Like,
Totally.
it was amazing.
Wow, that's incredible. I've never heard of the demo being a live set. I feel like that has to be on YouTube somewhere. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, it must be. I feel like I looked for it on Discogs a while back.
Right.
If it exists anywhere, it must be on Discogs, but I don't remember seeing it. So,
well, it's like I definitely remember the legend of them in regards to they were, if I'm not mistaken, calling themselves Cigar Edge, where they were straight edge except cigars, and I was like, dude, such a good move. But anyways,
they at least had that in common with Botch, because I remember Botch was never like I dyed in the wool straight edge band, but at various points in time, people did claim edge in the band, but towards the end,
sure.
Well, cigars, like, like Bill Clinton said, like, if you don't inhale it, then is it really even a drug?
Totally. What? There's a sliding scale for this stuff, and I think if we do this, like, this is fine.
Yeah. So that was the beginning of the end of any affiliation with straight edge. It was the cigar. It wasn't like
right.
shots or beer bongs. It was like, I don't know. Let's try cigars. It seems cool.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
This seems reasonable. Yeah. I'm going to guess too, just based off of your experience and clearly seeing where your life path headed you down. There was no hope for the military being a part of your life.
Oh no.
Yeah, no interest.
Well, it's funny, because I was a teenager during the whole "don't ask, don't tell," sort of debate, and it's now we look back on it, and people are like, "Oh my God, like I can't believe how like awful this was to the gay community." But as a teenager living on a military base, I was like, I don't know, I'm telling everyone at this point. Like, I've got Army recruiters calling me every day, and it's like, I'm just coming straight out and telling them I'm gay so that they fucking leave me alone. It's like it was definitely, I wanted no part in military life after living on a military base.
Sure.
So no.
Right. You're like, I saw the lay of the land. Not for me.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Why'd you gravitate towards bass? Was it simply because you tried guitar and you were like, oh, I kind of know how to play that, but bass is easier? Or what was the vibe there?
No, it was why, and I'm left-handed, and I didn't think I was going to be able to find a left-handed instrument anywhere in Hawaii, so I figured I'd just go right-handed, but playing guitar right-handed seemed too complicated, so bass seemed like, it seems like I could manage my way around four strings.
Did you do anything else with your right hand? Were you ambidextrous at all, or was this simply you just forced yourself to learn right-handed?
I just sort of forced myself to learn, but at that point it was Hawaii, so in grade school with music classes we practiced like the ukulele, and there was never enough left-handed ukuleles for all the left-handed kids, so eventually you just learned all the rudiments of ukulele on the right hand, and so I think there was like some early training from that.
Got it.
And then, but there's things now where it's like, when I go bowling, it's like I have no idea which hand I'm supposed to use with bowling because I'm terrible at both. Like a lot of like weird throwing a frisbee, swinging a bat. Like I have no idea. I'm not sports inclined anyway, so
totally. Yeah, you're like I don't even know, right. Yeah. I don't even know where to begin. Like, should I hold it here? Should I do it here? Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of, reflecting on, your early experiences within, punk and hardcore. And once you started to really become, more immersed in understanding that there is a local scene, there are local bands. And like you mentioned, or like I mentioned with your experience at that Undertow show and seeing there was a scene, what, was it one of those things that you got captured by the idea of being in a band sort of right away when you were in the Tacoma, Seattle area, or did that kind of, reveal itself slowly over time?
Yeah. I mean, I bought a bass when I was 14. I was still in Hawaii, and, some friends and I had a band. So when I moved to Washington, the one really exciting thing was that all of a sudden it's like, Tacoma's really close to Seattle. Tacoma had Seaweed, which was a band I was already a big fan of even before moving to Washington. So it definitely seemed like, if you wanted to play music, it was definitely better to be in Washington than Hawaii. So that was super exciting, but it still took, a year before I could find people to play with. And, on the military base, there was no one to play music with, I didn't have a driver's license, so I was kind of just stuck there. And then met Dave in a trigonometry class, and, he was a fan of a lot of similar heavy bands that I liked. And that became that.
Nice. Please reveal the name of your first band that you played in Hawaii.
I'm not going to do that.
The only reason that I would put you on the spot like that is because most likely I would be able to tell what the band sounded like based on the name.
Oh, gotcha. I'm not going to even say it, only because I can't imagine
it's okay
that there's any evidence of it existing anywhere. This is like one of the few, one of the perks of not starting out when the internet was a thing, where I don't think there's any document of us existing.
Of course.
But whatever may exist would be incredibly embarrassing. So I'd rather just not give any.
Understood completely.
But yeah, we were.
Yes,
we were
like
we were just a shitty punk band that we didn't even know about power chords. It was like literally like the Shags or something, just like like the most rudimentary knowledge of how an instrument works is bad. Yeah.
Got it. And so, once it's been well documented in regards to, the formation of Botch. So I'm not going to, really hit on a lot of those elements. But, as you guys started to, pick up momentum in regards to, touring and being able to, sign with Hydra Head and have some sort of national presence, how did, you personally and, maybe holistically the band operate in regards to the business aspect of it? Like, even though you were operating, on a different level than, your quote unquote career bands or whatever, you guys were still having to make decisions on like, oh yeah, like we're getting paid for this show. Like, what do we use this money for? So how was the business stuff sort of mixing up in things with Botch?
Well, it was still a lot of, DIY shows where, the tickets were just a few bucks, and, the first few tours we went on, we didn't have guarantees. So it was just, not uncommon to get paid like 30 or 40 bucks. And that was, all you had to work with, plus, whatever you made from selling 7 inches, which didn't have the greatest profit margin, and t-shirts. And, with t-shirts, it was hardcore. So you weren't expected to like do a huge markup on them because, you weren't expected to make money on anything. So it was, it was tough, but, we were lucky. And, it was an era where gas was under $1 a gallon. So you could make it work. And, we relied on the network of staying at people's houses, and, you only got a hotel room if you didn't have any other options. And, I think we occasionally did per diems where, people would get $5 a day or something, but, generally we just couldn't really afford that. So we, the finances were tight, but usually we were able to come home and, everyone was able to get like a month's worth of rent. So that was always pretty crucial. And, if you had a couple $100 to pay your bills, then, you could go back to work and get started on your next paycheck so that by the time the next month rolled around, like you were able to pay that. And, it worked, It was fine. It was the 90s. We were college students. It all worked out. And then, it wasn't until Romans came out that I think, we started making a little bit more money. We were able to like get guarantees where it was like, all right, we're definitely getting $100 tonight. This is amazing. And,
Right.
It was on Romans. It was the first time where, people would buy merch before we played, which was like a crazy thing. It's like, oh, these people know who we are. Like they came here with money to buy merch. We're not one of like 5 bands on a bill, and we're just hoping that someone like sees it. It's like, oh, this seems cool. Like I'll buy a 7-inch. It's like people are coming out, you're selling an album. At that point, we would come home and be like, oh, okay, well now we came home with like $1,000, and my rent's $200 a month. So it's like I actually got like a few months worth of rent and bills covered, and that's super exciting. But it never really got beyond that for us. I think, once we sort of announced that we were done, then, the handful of shows that we had on the, for the remainder of our tenure were pretty lucrative, but, it wasn't something you could live on today. So
yeah, you were ending.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And I think that's, yeah, and I think that's kind of why, I mean, a lot of people reflect on, the legacy of that particular band of being like, oh, what could have been? But, I think it's one of those things where you guys did a lot with the quote unquote limited means that existed for bands, of that genre during that time. It's like, you guys were able to, I mean, the fact that you put out as much music as you did was in and of itself a feat,
Well, I think it was tough too, because that, we never had like a coherent vision of what we were trying to do. It was more, we were hardcore kids, but, a couple of the guys in the band, not necessarily me, but like Tim and Dave Knudsen were, like pretty like badass musicians who actually like knew some things about music theory and technique and all that. So, I think for them, it was important to, to flex those abilities a little bit. There was also at the same time a rule where it's like, any given song should really only showcase like 10% of your ability. Like no one wants to hear a song where you're just like showing off 100% of the time. So it's, I think those dudes were interested in making music that was interesting and challenging and a little difficult and strange, as like a reimagining of hardcore, but pushing it forward in some sort of new and unexpected ways. And that was about the extent of the vision. And then, for We Are the Romans, I think we all kind of locked in and we're all sort of, I don't know, I think we were all in sync for that time period. And we were able to come out with a lot of material that we're all happy about. But after that, it was a lot harder to figure out what we wanted, and it was, I think, Dave was already kind of starting to write things that would eventually become a part of the Minus the Bear sound. And, I was, never someone to do a lot of contributions to the band, but when I did, it was something like Afghanistan, where it was, of a different sound and timbre. So, I think we were all just trying to figure out what we wanted, and I think it just kind of came to the realization that maybe it needed to involve different people. So, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. It was reaching its logical and creatively. Yeah. Yeah, of course. And in also kind of in reflecting, a lot of the, bands that you've played in, I mean, I've basically personally followed you throughout all of your musical projects, like Roy, These Arms Are Snakes, everything you've done have been like, oh yeah, anything that Brian's involved in, like I'm listening, tell me more. But specifically with These Arms Are Snakes and Roy, that was at that era where, bands of the independent, music variety were actually being able to figure out quote unquote livings for themselves, and, trying to make it whatever that meant. And I think both of those bands in particular, from a professional perspective, were that had the potential, but were, in my opinion, a little bit early on the game, where it was like, oh man, if this band existed, a couple years later, it could have been, a whole different story. Does that sentiment that I share, I kind of, not only mean something to you, but like, is that something that you're like, not like you could retrofit the band into different eras, but like, if you felt like oh man, if we existed in the 2010s, it would have been a whole different story, and not like the old high school football quarterback talking about their one game or whatever. But does that kind of resonate with you at all?
No, totally. I think that's I think that's actually pretty spot on. With both bands, there wasn't really career aspirations with either of them. They were both done as hobbies, as things that that's what you did. You're in your early 20s and you owned a guitar, you played in a band. That was my social life, was going to shows and playing shows and having band practice, and like, it was just what you did. And with Roy, it was kind of funny because it wasn't even really a serious band. It was, the Verellen brothers, just kind of indulging in their, worship of things like the Rentals and the Breeders, and, just kind of doing these weird, fuzzy, like indie rock songs. And I weaseled my way on board, and, it was just like a recording project that we didn't even think was going to result in playing live shows, but we did some recordings, and they somehow wound up on some message boards. And the next thing you know, like, we have Fueled by Ramen saying that they wanted to sign us to this incubator deal through Island Records. And like, we were just kind of like, really? Like, I guess we have to like do this because it's like kind of too good of an opportunity to pass up on. But it was also not like,
right.
It wasn't what we wanted. It wasn't what we were trying to do at all. We were just going to write, these kind of weird, fuzzy pop songs in the basement and make, little 4-track recordings of them and share them with friends. But instead we signed with Island / Fueled by Ramen, and, they gave us a bunch of money to make a record and buy a van, and the record didn't sell. And then they were like, well, yeah, we're not going to pursue option 2, but you're happy to, you can do whatever you want with, future recordings. Like, you're released from contract. And it was kind of like the perfect, like, flirtation with a major label. Cause it was like, oh, we basically made the record we wanted. No one got involved, creatively with any of the decisions. And when it didn't sell, they're like, oh, well, that didn't work out. It's fine. So it was kind of weird, and it like kind of ideal in a lot of ways. And then at the same time, with These Arms Are Snakes, within the same 24 hours that Roy signed this deal with Island and Fueled by Ramen, we signed with Jade Tree. And that was like a no-brainer just because I loved the Jade Tree roster, and, I'd heard nothing but good things about the way they, dealt with their accounting and paid out their artists. And, Tim and Darren had kind of come out to Seattle to meet with These Arms Are Snakes. And there's like, yeah, if you sell like 10,000 copies, that tends to be the line where after you sell 10,000 copies of a record, like, you can make a living just touring and, being in a band. And that was super enticing. But that didn't wind up being the case, even though Snakes did sell upwards of 10,000 copies of all of our records. But, we struggled with, constantly being in debt, and, probably toured too much, and, oversaturated the market, and, made some bad decisions in terms of how much merch, we needed to bring on tours and things like that. And, it quickly turned into a thing where it's like, oh, this is not a career option. This is never going to be a career option.
Yeah.
I think within like the first year of touring, we were all sort of like, oh yeah, like having a job is totally fine. Like the goal isn't to not have a job. The goal is to have a job that like, lets you go on tour, because it's so much nicer to come home and be like, all right, now I'm going to go to work and I'm not going to stress about money, and I'm not going to be making decisions that are for the band that are based on strictly on what I think is going to generate revenue. Cause those decisions rarely are like the interesting ones artistically. So, it was a weird time where it was that post at the drive-in refused era where I think people felt like, if you just worked hard enough as like a underground rock band, you could make a career of it too, just like those bands. But, I don't know. I feel bad saying this as someone that's now a career musician, I guess, but it's just like, it's the dumbest thing to aspire to because like so few artists get there, and the journey to try to be that kind of band usually winds up being such a shit show. It's like, don't try to make a living being an artist. Just be an artist. Be an artist and like enjoy your craft and like savor the independence that comes with not feeling like every decision you make has to be financially motivated. That's the important thing. And if it works out and you do become like a career musician, that's fucking awesome. Like that's like, I don't think there's any reason anyone should ever be bummed or ashamed of it. Like artists were in the 90s, and stuff, but like, it's like, don't aspire.
Right.
Because it's just like, it's a carrot on a stick,
Hey, it's Ray, the host of this very podcast. And let me ask you a question. What if you had insights into your genetics that could help empower you to live healthier? How would you use that knowledge? You can hear me talk about insights from my DNA that have affected my personal health journey on this season of the podcast Spit from iHeartRadio and 23andMe. Host Baratunde Thurston, which by the way, incredible dude, has a podcast called How to Citizen. I can't highly recommend that any more than I am right now, but listen to that and listen to this podcast. But he explores how more and more people are finding out that DNA is about more than just ancestry. It's a key to understanding your health. Your genetic profile can tell you if you are at an increased likelihood for developing a particular condition. It's knowledge that can help you make smarter choices about your health and your lifestyle. On this season of Spit, you'll hear me and 22 other podcasters and influencers discuss what genetics revealed about our health and how that knowledge can impact the way we live our lives. Listen to my episode out now on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Football is back, and BetMGM is inviting new customers to join the huddle and enjoy the action like never before. Sign up today using bonus code JERSEY, and your first wager is risk-free up to $1,000. Visit BetMGM.com for terms and conditions. New customer offer. 21 years of age or older to wager. New Jersey only. All promotions are subject to qualification and eligibility requirements. Rewards issued as non-withdrawable free bets or site credit. Free bets expire 7 days from issuance. Please gamble responsibly. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it becomes you step into the business aspect of it, and obviously the continual clash between art and commerce. It's difficult to be able to thread those needles, and that actually segues perfectly into what I feel like you've been able to accomplish with Russian Circles, because even though that band stylistically, there's no quote unquote hope for, mainstream success for a bunch of obvious reasons, but you guys have been able to continually craft, release music, tour, but not drive yourselves, in my opinion, into the ground to where, you have whatever oversaturated yourself, and then you're not able to exist in your own lives to be able to creatively come to the table with some, some new perspectives or whatever. So I'm going to guess that is something that, did all of you guys kind of like come to the collective table with that sort of, not like you were able to articulate it when you were starting the band, but just that idea of like, oh yes, like we know we're going to pursue the band, but like there's going to be all these other things that we're pursuing as well. So it's hopefully they'll never like be all consuming where we can't do anything else.
Are you talking about this with Russian Circles, or with which band?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. With Russian Circles, yeah.
I mean, Russian Circles, it's a little different because, initially the band was Mike, Dave, and Colin was their original bass player. And I came on for the second album. So,
Yep.
There was kind of already a lot of traction and momentum with the band before I was involved in any way. And it wasn't to a point where those guys were living off their music. They were both still working jobs. But, pretty quickly after I joined on, it got to a point where, I think it was sort of more difficult to remain employed in addition to being in the band than to not be, if that makes sense. That didn't really come out very articulate, but it was harder to like work a job at home because we were just touring so much.
Sure.
And, the band was based in Chicago, but I was out in Seattle, and, that meant, anytime we were practicing, it was involved flying out to Chicago and things like that. So it was with Russian Circles where, I kind of stopped working normal jobs on the side. And there was some overlap with These Arms Are Snakes still being active, and I was juggling both bands. So I was touring, twice as much at that point. But the dialogue for Russian Circles has always kind of been, what would Fugazi do? What would Mogwai do? Like when you see a band and they make it work and they seem like they're just doing what they want to do on their terms, but haven't like made a bunch of compromises. Like, what are their decisions that they're making? Like, that's the way to approach it. Because, a lot of times things get offered where it's like, well, that could be like a really good move career wise, but it could also, I don't know, it could also backfire. And, a lot of times, I don't know, I think people can kind of tell when you're doing things just for financial reasons, and it's a bad look. So it's more important to, I don't know, just do what feels right and what feels tasteful, and not get suckered into like someone telling you, oh, this is going to be good for you professionally. Cause if you don't want to do it, don't do it. It's really kind of as simple as that, So, we've been
Sure
about what we do.
If it doesn't pass the sniff test.
Yeah. We say no to things all the time. We are selective about what we do, and, sometimes that might mean we make a little less money, but, overall, I think it means that we're proud of everything that we present, and, we feel good about it. So we're a lucky band, and I'm still kind of stunned that, there's been enough attention paid to what we do that we can do this, 17 years later. It's wild.
Yeah.
But, it's also one of those things. It's like, if you had told me, it's like, yeah, you're going to make a living playing music, playing in an instrumental 3-piece band that does long form, heavy dissonant, instrumental songs. It's like, really? That's that's the thing that's gonna.
You're like, no. Yeah. Right.
Somehow it works. So
What's the? Yeah. What's the? Speaking just because I find it usually entertaining and not from a bad direction, but just like the, when you do get presented, opportunities, whether it's with a tour or whether it's like, hey, license your song to a commercial. What was like, when I say that, what was kind of the, funniest thing that you saw kind of come across your desk, maybe from the Russian Circles perspective or any other perspective that you can recall that was like, oh, this is not a good fit. Not even from like a monetary perspective, but just like, why would you even ask us to do that?
Yeah. I'm, nothing immediately offhand. A lot of times it's just, you get like, well, we did a tour with Mastodon. We did a couple tours with Mastodon, and the second US tour we did with them was sort of routed around a lot of festival dates. And, there were festivals that Mastodon was added to. The invitation wasn't always extended to us because, this was, it's not their show. They're part of a festival lineup. So it's either the festival says, oh, we want the whole package, or they don't. But every once in a while, there would be an offer where it's like, oh, do you want to, Mastodon's playing this festival. Do you guys want to play too? And you kind of just like look at the other list of bands and it's like, ooh, no, I think we're good. Like, I don't think we'll really benefit from playing at 11 a.m. on the, the Doritos stage at the, Rockstar Energy Drink Mayhem tour stop, being heavy.
Sure. Sure.
It's just like, none of us are really that interested in I don't know, like, I don't want to play a show that I know is going to be a bad show just because I think it's going to look good on paper. That's just never something that's not put forward. So things like that mainly. But there's other weird little things. Like I was thinking about this earlier in our conversation when you were talking about Fortuna, because we licensed that song for like a boat commercial, which is something that like, in 1995 when we recorded it, someone had been like, oh yeah, like if someone came at you and asked, to use this song to sell like sports boats, what would you say? I'd been like, absolutely fucking not, like that's like selling out, like
right.
No way. But, and so, when that offer came in, I think initially we were like, you know what, like we appreciate the offer, but like, no, like that's just weird. Like we don't want to sell a song to a commercial. But the boat company wrote back and they're like, well, if it makes you feel any better, it's like we're a mom and pop company. We build everything by hand. We build like 100 boats a year. Like we're not like a car company. We're like craftsmen that build like these boats, and we like your band, and like we like the Carmina Burana, so like. We just thought it would be kind of cool, and then like when there was that like direct one-on-one, conversation about it, it's like, oh, okay, well that's totally different. It's like, if you're like actual,
yeah, we get it.
Yeah. If you're like your own, like you're an artist of your own kind, like you're a craftsman, you're building something by hand, and, you have some sort of connection to the hardcore world. And, ultimately at the end of the day, it's not even our song. It's, it's a cover. So, hearing that and having that kind of dialogue made us feel a lot better about being like, yeah, go ahead and use the song. Like that's cool. Maybe someone who's buying a boat will also be like, man, that cover of the Carmina Burana is pretty cool. Maybe that'll open their ears up to some other Botch songs, and that would be cool, but I'm not going to bank on that, but
sure.
Whatever. It's
yeah. Weird. We're not going to reverse engineer that.
Yeah. I don't think anyone becomes a Botch fan, in the age bracket where they're also buying boats, but you never know. I guess it could happen. Stranger things.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. The last two things I want to hit on before I let you go was the, with touring, because you've experienced touring on a lot of different levels with a lot of different, musical projects and bands and styles, because you have painted with a pretty broad brush as far as your musical output is concerned. How has your relationship with tour changed over time? Have you, I presume it's ebbed and flowed in regards to like, you've really enjoyed it sometimes, and then sometimes it feels like you're just, running on the hamster wheel. What, talk me through that.
Yeah, I don't know. It's tough. I enjoy touring. I enjoy performing, and that's something that I try not to take for granted, because there's a lot of musicians out there who love everything about being in a band, but they actually don't like performing, or they don't like touring, or they don't like some aspect of the process, and I enjoy all of it. I enjoy being on stage. I enjoy writing and recording, and I enjoy all the, I enjoy loading in and out and setting up gear and all that stuff. Like I enjoy the road trip quality of being behind the wheel and playing your favorite records as you're driving from point A to point B. Like I like all that, but there's definitely tours that are great, and where you're like, oh, this is why I do it. And then, then you'll go on another tour and it's like, ooh, this one is definitely not as good as the last one. And, it's hard when you have like the highs to ride out some of the lows, but, I think, I tend to approach it as, at the end of the day, I'm doing it for my own sort of selfish reasons. And that's that I like playing music and, I like hearing my music in real time as I'm playing out of a PA. There's something just incredibly satisfying about that. And so even if the other circumstances surrounding the tour aren't ideal, if there's, low turnouts for a tour, or if there's just some sort of drama going on, in the tour party, whatever it may be, it's never ideal, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad experience. Like I don't think I've ever really come home from tour being like, wow, that was just a nightmare and I wish it hadn't happened. So I'm fortunate in that regard. I think there's always been like some sort of positive takeaway from every tour. All that said, with COVID happening last year, it wasn't completely unpleasant to have a break from touring. We had gone pretty hard on touring on our last album, Russian Circle's Guidance album, because we got invited to do 3 tours with Mastodon. So that was like a whole year's worth of touring, where, we weren't doing our own headlining things and we weren't writing new material. So, you come out of a year of doing support tours and then it's like, well, you want to do like a victory lap and now you want to go back and do your own shows to your own fans and any new fans you might have gotten from all the opening slots. So, it just made the whole touring cycle on that record like so much longer and involved so much more touring. And with that, I was ready for a break after that. And I think on some level it'll be really exciting to come back and to have it feel like refreshed in a lot of ways. So, it's me really trying to find the silver lining out of a shitty 2 years, that we've all had. But I think there is some sort of benefit of being re-energized and, being excited to, perform again. I think we're all stoked. And I want to emphasize that I wasn't burned out or bummed on anything that we did, but it was definitely like, ooh, yeah, a year and a half off was nice. It was nice to like let some, repetitive stress injuries kind of heal up, to kind of get back on some better health habits and, at least have 1 year at home to see the seasons change and kind of feel sort of grounded. That's something that I haven't really had a lot of opportunity to do in my adult life. And that was actually pretty nice. So, I don't know. I am excited to go back out on tour though.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's, absence makes the heart grow fonder, Brian.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's, there is too much, there can't be too much of a good thing. So, I feel very lucky that I get to do something that I love, as a 44-year-old dude. Like I feel very grateful and very lucky, but yeah, it's also nice to have a little break. So I'm not going to complain.
Yeah, absolutely. With the last thing with your, the solo record you put out, and that always has so many elements of you feeling, more exposed as an artist because there's literally nothing to hide behind. It's just you putting yourself out there front and center. And since you have, done so many different musical things and have always been a part of bands in general, did you feel, and I know this kind of sounds like a hacky, cliched question, but did you really, go through the thought process of feeling more vulnerable and exposed from that perspective? Or was it basically like, well, I'm going to do this because it doesn't really necessarily fit into anything else that I want to accomplish with my music, the bands that I play with.
Yeah. I think, again, it was another, if there's I guess a constant theme through our conversation, it's, aim low. Where it's like, don't try to be a professional musician, don't pick the harder instrument, like keep your expectations as low as possible. And run from there. So, with the Torment and Glory record, there's a bunch of songs that I'd kind of been working on over the last 10 years or so, not in any serious capacity, but just, the things that kind of fall out of your hands when you're, you walk up and pick up an acoustic guitar in the corner of the room. It's like there's certain things that your fingers kind of default to, and those slowly turn into song fragments, and then they turn into songs, and then it eventually turns into a record. And, the bits and pieces had kind of been laying around for a long time, and they're usually shared with bandmates. Like I know Mike and Dave have heard pretty much everything off that record in some capacity over the last few years. And I hadn't even realized it until about a month ago. These Arms Are Snakes are putting out like a double album of like rarities and B-sides, and, like rarities. I think I already said that, but yeah, basically like a compilation of
it's okay.
non-studio album stuff. And one of the things that came up was like an instrumental piece that none of us had any recollection of working on, but it's like, oh shit, we can't put this on the record because that's actually been repurposed and turned into the last song off the Torment and Glory record. But apparently I'd shared that with the Snakes guys at some point. So, there are things that I just kind of wrote spontaneously and, without any real formal idea of what would happen with them. I'd had some idea of doing like a little, like cassette tape on a friend's noise label, and just doing kind of these deconstructed and sonically degraded folk songs with like a lot of surface noise and fuzz and distortion. And so that was kind of the closest thing to like a bigger picture in my head for what would eventually turn into this record. But I kind of wound up abandoning it just because it didn't really come together the way I was hearing it in my head. And it wasn't until COVID came around that I was like, oh, there's always that. There's not a lot you can do musically right now. And, even with writing Russian Circle songs for our upcoming record, it's like at a certain point, my hands are tied if, all my homework's done and I've submitted everything, and, I'm just waiting for feedback and, waiting for the drum tracks to come in, or, whatever holding pattern, kind of happens when you're working collaboratively with people. And I just wanted to stay busy. So I was like, well, I have all these songs. I'll just try tracking them, and maybe this cassette thing will finally happen. And once I started sharing songs with my friend Ben Chisholm, and he started helping out with mixing, I think he was kind of the first person to sort of encourage me to take it a little bit more seriously. And I think he was sort of the first person whose affirmation felt kind of not to say that other people who I shared the songs with ever seemed dishonest in their feedback, but I think it's like if you're sharing a song with a bandmate, they're not gonna be like, that sucks, dude. Like you totally blew it. You're bad at guitar. Your bandmates are always encouraging. They're always like, oh, that's great. I'm not really sure if that fits the tone of the album, so maybe we're not going to use that. But it's a great song, good work. So sharing it with someone like Ben, who's like an outsider who doesn't necessarily need to butter me up with compliments, having someone like that be like, no, these songs they're good. Like, I think people will like them. Like you should definitely at least try to do more than just making 40 cassette tapes. And I think more people would be interested in this than just 40 people. So he kind of nudged me into sharing it with Sergeant House. And, and with Sergeant House, it's like kind of one of those funny things where, Kathy always kind of talks about like, everyone's got a solo project. Like, I'm not here to put out people's solo projects. I'm here to like put out like artists who are like dedicated to their craft. Like, everyone has a solo project. I don't need to be involved in everyone's, solo project. So when I sent it to Kathy, there was this, multi-paragraph thing being like, Kathy, I know you don't like solo projects. I'm sorry I'm sending you this, but you are my manager. So you're like, you at least want to know what I'm up to. So I'm just letting you know I'm putting out a cassette. Like, here it is. Ben encouraged me to share it with you. I don't expect you to put it out, blah, 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 blah. And, Kathy was just like, you're right. I hate solo projects. Like, there's no point in doing solo projects. And then, a couple hours later it was like, yeah, this is too good for it to be a cassette. So we're going to do like 500 copies on vinyl and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, oh, okay. Well, that works too. Like, thanks, Kathy.
You're like, let's go. Yeah.
I think if I
no, it's
I think if I had gone into it being like, I'm going to try and, get Sergeant House to put this out as like a formal thing, like, I think I would have been too self-conscious about it the whole time. And I don't think it would have been as good of a record because I would have been approaching it differently. When I was working on it and recording it in January, it was like, I'm not even sure if this is going to be like a tape or if this is just going to be like a practice run at like doing this more seriously at some point later on down the road or whatever, so it was aiming low and then, being happy with the results and just kind of letting it do its thing on its own, not trying to force it on anyone and, not trying to make it seem like a bigger deal than it is, but, letting the people decide if it should be out there or not.
Sure. Well, I sense a theme with that, Brian.
Yeah. Aim low.
Well, yeah, exactly. Aim low, and then maybe you'll what do they say? They aim for the moon and be happy landing at the stars or some cheesy aphorism like that. But yeah,
it's like you come up in hardcore. It's like all my most formative shows were like tiny shows. I wasn't like someone who was raised on the idea of like wanting to be the Rolling Stones playing at Madison Square Gardens. I was inspired by like seeing Undertow play to 90 people at Ground Zero, back in 1993, or seeing Fugazi play a college auditorium, on the Steady Diet of Nothing tour in 91. Those were like the formative shows, and all of that stuff seemed like attainable. Like part of the allure of it was like, oh, like I think anyone could go do that. Like I could go do that, and so those were the goals, and those all seemed achievable. And then, trying to take it anywhere beyond that was just, the icing on the cake. It was just like, oh, well, if I can also, put out a full length, like that's awesome too. If we get to go to Europe, like I never thought that would happen. So that's cool too, but it wasn't like, I don't know. The goal was never like a number. It was never like a level that had to be attained. It was just
world domination.
Yeah, exactly. It's like if you make something and people respond to it, that's a positive thing, and that's all you can hope for.
There you have it. Thank you very much, Brian, for hanging out on this show. It's always appreciated when people want to spend more than their allotted time with me, because usually I ask for an hour, and when people are fine to extend that time, and I'm not bringing it up in advance, being like, hey, is it cool that we're running long? Like, it just the conversation flows, and I really appreciate that. So thanks to Brian. Thank you to Stephanie, who is a good friend of mine and does great publicity work. She always brings great ideas to the table, and I'm like, you know what? Let's go ahead and do that. And that's exactly what happened with Brian. So, and plus, check out Torment Glory, check out Botch, check out Russian Circles. I know that sounds like basic, but hopefully you may not have heard of one of those projects, and you'll then now listen to it, because that's the point of this whole thing, document these people's experiences and then get you jumping off into other music that you might enjoy. Next week is a fun episode because he's a friend of mine. His name is Carl Hensel. He runs the merch company called Kings Road Merch, and he also plays in a band called Desperate Acts, which is a recent formation, but he also played in bands like Holding On and Martyr. He's a lifer. And he came to me being like, hey, I'm putting out this new record. It would be cool to, appear on your show and do some publicity for it or whatever. And I was like, you know what? That's a really good idea, Carl. I've always enjoyed you as a human. So I think this will be a fun conversation. And it was. So if you are a hardcore and punk lifer and want to figure out ways to, try to make this into a real job or whatever, this is how he did it. And it's not advice by any stretch of the imagination, but it's just a path that one could maybe take. But ultimately, showing takes a lot of hard work. So that's what we got next week. Thank you very much. And until then, please be safe, everybody.
Tired of long waits and rushed care at the ER and urgent care clinic? Next time, stay home and let Dispatch Health bring the power of the hospital to you.
I call Dispatch Health. A care team of medical professionals actually come to your house.
They're the same caliber of people that you would see if you were at a hospital or an urgent care.
Dispatch Health can treat most non-life-threatening emergencies.
They can do the x-rays, they can do stitches,
urinary tract infections, blood test, urinalysis, ultrasound.
It's almost everything that they can do at the ER.
You never feel rushed. They're there for you and only you.
I felt like their only patient.
And it costs no more than a trip to urgent care because Dispatch Health is covered by most insurance, including Medicare. See if we serve your home at dispatchhealth.com.
Dispatch Health really went above and beyond.
It's wonderful to have care come to your home.
House calls are back, and they're better than ever. Learn more at dispatchhealth.com.
UFOs, psychic powers, chemtrails. To learn about mysterious events, you listen to the Stuff They Don't Want You to Know podcast. And here's where it gets crazy. Now you can read all about your favorite conspiracy theories in the Stuff They Don't Want You to Know book from the creators of the podcast. Dive into a smart, witty explanation of the unexplainable, packed with amazing illustrations. Available now. Order today at StuffYouShouldReadBooks.com or wherever you buy your books.